All right, we're here on the stream. Good morning. I gotta wait till this music quits playing the K-Talk. Oh, brother. Hard and I fight hard for the old red, white, and blue, and I'll die a whole lot harder if it comes to where I have to. I don't know if you can hear this on the stream. It's kind of funny, Johnny Cash. This patriotic music, I don't know about that. All right, good morning, everybody. It is the 10th day of March, 2026, and you are listening to Global Affairs Unfiltered with me, Jack Stockwell. Simulcasting K-Talk, and apparently my connection with X is down. Don't know why, so I am on YouTube. YouTube.com/Global Affairs Unfiltered. So I'm looking into the X connection, try to find out what's going on. Well, my goodness, the Doomsday plane, E6B, several of them, these Doomsday planes are now in the air over the Middle East. I want to give you a world update as well. Plus, now they have pretty well confirmed that it was a U.S. Tomahawk that took out those 160 plus girls and teachers. So I got some more information on that that'll come up here shortly. But the New York Times and Wall Street Journal slowed down the videos that we have. You can see the Tomahawk approaching the school. I'll get into more of that later in the show. I think it's interesting to start it off this morning. President Trump spent an hour-long conversation with President Putin yesterday. And according to the Kremlin aide Yuri Yushakov, they talked for about an hour. And he said that the discussion centered around the situation, around the conflict with Iran and the trilateral negotiations on the Ukrainian settlement. So Yushakov said that he said the conversation was businesslike, it was frank and constructive, that they had not spoken on the phone for a long time, since the end of December 2025. What's that? That's more than 2 months ago. I think that's back when President Trump had called Putin and wanted to make sure that he was at his home before President Trump sent those missiles to kill him. I wonder if that was in the conversation yesterday. But anyway, Trump gave his assessment, and Yushakov called the discussion very substantive. He said, he says it was a useful exchange. And on the Ukraine, Trump underlined his desire for a ceasefire to achieve a long-term settlement, which, of course, the Russians are not going to do a ceasefire. What President Putin will not have happen is a ceasefire, because that allows the other side to rearm. President Trump wants a ceasefire to let the other side rearm. So while Putin expressed this positive assessment of the mediation efforts undertaken by Trump's team and him personally, Yushakov said that the Russian troops are progressing very successfully, and it's a factor that should encourage the regime in Kyiv to finally take the path to negotiating conflict resolution. Yushakov said this, "On the whole, I repeat that the conversation turned out to be a success, very informative, and undoubtedly will be of practical importance for further work of the two countries in various areas of international politics." For Pete's sake. You know, the need to be politically correct in the midst of, what do you think they really talked about? I think President Putin said, President Trump, Donald, my friend, you need to get a better source of information, because you guys are absolutely getting your butts kicked in Iran, from Iran in Israel, and all your American bases, and all of your extremely expensive multi-billion-dollar radar network is down. You have no coverage for THAAD anymore. You can't even use the THAAD missiles. Air coverage over Iran is pretty well controlled by Iran now. I was mentioning this to somebody yesterday. I don't remember if it was on the radio show or somebody else, to a patient. But back in the 12-day war, last June, the news was just filled with all kinds of photos and videos of America's dominance of the skies over Iran, with the bombing of those 3 nuclear sites and the other bombing that was taking place. Just pictures in the newspaper, pictures on television, but there's no pictures now. There's no pictures of America's dominance of the skies over Iran. Now remember, Iran is more than twice the size of the Ukraine. Iran is huge, 70 times the size of Israel for that matter. And this is just, it's coming down to the wire, where it was necessary for Trump to have a conversation with Putin. Because I think Putin was telling Trump, we know you have the E6B Doomsday plane in the air over the Middle East. In fact, they have several of them. This E6B doesn't carry weapons. It has no bombs, no machine guns, no bullets. It has a skeletal crew that flies the plane, and it is the last link in the nuclear chain from the so-called football that goes around with the president wherever he is. Those communication signals don't just go out from the little suitcase of the nuclear football that the designated officer in the military carries along with the president. There's a whole chain of information that's involved. And you want to, the real damaging threat, maybe I should use a different term, the real nuclear deterrent that exists on this planet is the Soviet nuclear submarines and the American nuclear submarines, of which I think America dominates. Because the land-based nuclear sites, the Dakotas, Montana, here in our country, and in Canada, the Russians know where they're at. And we know where their ground-based nuclear sites are, their silos. That could be, in a nuclear exchange, could be taken out rather quickly, especially with a first strike. But the submarines, that's a different matter. And being able to track where they are, a lot of autonomy is given to the commander of a nuclear submarine in dire situations where they can run and hide. So how do they communicate with the nuclear football? Well, these E6B Doomsday planes, affectionately referred to as Doomsday planes, have this 5-mile long antenna that extends out beyond the airplane's tail end. And it's very low frequency. So because it's low frequency, it can penetrate the water. And that's how they communicate with nuclear subs. And as I said, the subs, because we don't know where they're at, we don't know where the Russian subs are. Technically, they don't know where our subs are. And these things have a capability of, with each sub, releasing a more destructive power from one submarine than the entire destructive power of World War II all put together. So that kind of acts as a deterrent. Did Trump and Putin talk about that? Did Putin mention, hey, we know you've got those E6Bs up in the air. I hope, Donald, that that's not a harbinger of something you're planning on doing, since you guys are losing this Iran war terribly bad. Well, I'm going to go on from there. Anyway, it was considered substantive, and a lot of good things were accomplished. I hope President Trump apologized for trying to assassinate Vladimir Putin 3 months ago. Now, I also mentioned yesterday a real problem spreading through the American military right now because there is this, I don't know if it's growing or it's being contained, but it's this idea that God made sure that President Trump got elected when he did, and that he has the crew with him that he does in order to accelerate the war of Armageddon. Now, 30 members of the U.S. Congress called on the Department of Defense Inspector General Mooring in a letter back on the 6th of March to investigate the reports that some of these military leaders are instructing their forces that the war on Iran is to fulfill biblical end times prophecy. I talked a little about this yesterday. I've got some more information. The co-chair of the Free Thought Caucus, Jared Huffman, who's a Democrat from California, a lead sponsor of this call, issued a press release and a 2-page letter. First of the 6 areas of investigation is key. This is from his letter. I'll just quote a couple of paragraphs. We urge you to assess whether Secretary Hegseth's extreme religious rhetoric has metastasized into segments of the military chain of command in ways that contravene constitutional protections, departmental rules and standards, or professional military norms. We specifically request that the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General investigate the following. Number 1, whether military commanders or other officers have made statements to subordinates asserting that U.S. military operations against Iran are part of a religious prophecy, divine plan, or apocalyptic religious event, and if so, where such communications originated. For those of you on the stream, I'll continue because there's a commercial at K-Talk. If so, where such communications originated within the chain of command, whether directly passed down a chain of command from the so-called Secretary of War, Peter Hegseth, or carried out independently by commanders already in the Armageddonist cult. The out-of-control nature of this present situation warrants immediate measures. I couldn't agree more. I don't always agree with a lot of what comes out of various party associations inside the Democratic Party. But then again, I find myself agreeing with less and less with the same thing on the Republican side, since they both make up, pretty much 50% of the war party. But I have to agree with this one. I need to turn that off. All right. Now, The Guardian, it's not the most popular paper in London, but it's up there, ran a story 2 days ago. And in this story, its Washington correspondent, David Smith, had this headline: a very dangerous person. Alarm as Pete Hegseth revels in carnage of Iran war. And its importance is in the prominence it gives to Hegseth's crusader mentality and the danger that it presents to all of us. How many, and I'm not saying that Pete Hegseth is on the same level as a lot of these shootings around our country, where not necessarily where the trans people were involved, which of course is the majority, but others that have this racist bent or religious bent, and that in the name of God, they find themselves doing things they would not normally do, such as that attack on that LDS church last year up in Minnesota, Wisconsin, wherever it was, that it was his responsibility as a servant of God to do something about the LDS church. Now, I'm quoting from The Guardian. Hegseth, 45, a former Fox News TV host, who now commands the world's most powerful military, has this week become the face of Donald Trump's war in Iran. This has set off alarm bells for critics who warned that the Secretary of Defense, pointedly rebranded Secretary of War, has rapidly transformed the Pentagon into the staging ground for an ideological and religious crusade. With machismo, Christian nationalism, and callousness toward the lives of U.S. troops, they say, Hegseth's puerile displays on the TV are aimed at sating Trump's desire for a warmonger worthy of the manosphere. This was reinforced by a lurid social media video that intersperses clips from Hollywood blockbusters such as Braveheart, Gladiator, Superman, Top Gun, with continuing images of Hegseth and a real kill shot footage of the attacks in Iran. I don't know if you've seen these or not. But it's rather gripping. Now, Janessa Goldbeck is the chief executive of the Vet Voice Foundation. It's a nonprofit advocacy organization. She said this: Pete Hegseth is a very dangerous person. He's a white Christian nationalist and has the arsenal of the United States government at his disposal and a permission slip from President Trump to deploy carnage wherever he wishes against whomever he wishes. Now, this Janessa Goldbeck is a Marine Corps veteran who she was deployed overseas as a combat engineer officer. She said this: I wish I could say how cavalier, obtuse, and hopeless Secretary Hegseth is at leading the Pentagon. I can't even muster the words to describe his self-adulation, matched only in scope by his apparent moral depravity. Wow. Now, Smith follows Goldbeck's comments, Smith writing in The Guardian, David Smith, putting out a rather sordid history of Hegseth. But it comes down to, I'm going to skip a lot of the things that he says here because it's not very attractive. But the thing that they're complaining the most about, the thing that they're the most concerned about is a growing number of military commanders invoking extremist Christian rhetoric about biblical end times in order for them to be able to justify America's involvement in this war on Iran. Now, Robert P. Jones, who's president and founder of Public Religion Research Institute think tank in Washington, said, it casts this not as anything related to the public. Is it about a nuclear program? Is it about sponsoring terrorism, which are legitimate political concerns? And it takes out the realm of politics and casts it as a holy war of supposedly Christian nation against a Muslim nation. I just wanted to bring that to your attention because I think this is going to become more and more prominent in the news, that there are those who have command authority, who believe that what they're doing is the will of God against the Muslim nation in support of Israel, and their beliefs in the scriptural description of Armageddon, and that somehow God has chosen the United States to be his sword and shield in moving the tide of war in a direction that would more fully fulfill the scripture. Now, that is what Islamic terrorists believe, doing the will of Allah, and what they're capable of doing. Now, there's always a political bent behind it. Hardly is anything done in the name of God anymore solely in the name of God. There's money behind it, there's political gain behind it. And of course, the reason why President Trump 3 times the other day in an interview said the war will come to an end when Netanyahu says so. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but that shocked me. I looked into it further. When can this war come to an end? Not until Netanyahu says so. So it's all about Eretz Israel. It's all about the greater Israel. It's all about getting the last element that the PNAC document 20 years ago was talking about. Iran, the last big monster that prevents Israel from taking over everything that it wants. And as our ambassador to Israel said, why not let them? Why not let them take everything? Let them go ahead. Let them take everything. For which he should have been immediately called home. All right, a little bit more on this attack on the Iranian girls' school. Iran's Mir News agency shared this video that it claims to show the moment when Israeli and American terrorists struck the Mainab school. On the February 28th attack, in the first 24 hours of the surprise attack on Iran, the attack killed some 168 girls between 7 and 12 years of age, along with a handful of teachers. And at the time of the direct hit upon the school, the U.S. air assault destroyed several military facilities in the area. Mainab is near the Straits of Hormuz, and Mainab includes an Iranian naval complex. So both the Washington Post and the New York Times have verified the authenticity of the footage using satellite imagery, social media posts, and other geolocated videos. And previously, the experts have described the type of damage showing up in satellite photos as reflecting the pattern of the air assault, though not specifically by a Tomahawk missile. Now the experts' analysis of the brief video adds that a Tomahawk is the lead candidate. So Wes Bryant, a former U.S. Air Force Special Operations targeting expert, told the Washington Post that the missile's outline correlates with those of a Tomahawk. And according to NPR Jeffrey Lewis, a professor of global security at Middlebury College, separately confirmed the assessment. Lewis added that the missile did not resemble any known weapons in Iran's arsenal. And 8 independent munitions experts, according to the Washington Post, described the clip as the latest indication of likely U.S. involvement in the strike. Now, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has been unapologetic about it, only repeating that an investigation is still ongoing, suggesting that Iran targeted the school. Despite this, another break at K-Talk. I will continue with those here on the stream. Despite this, it's generally suspected that Hegseth's reliance on the AI-generated targets with no human review may have allowed a property, a building, which 13 years ago was converted to a schoolyard and school building from a military installation. And it may be the AI targeted that school based on old information that it was once a military outpost. But for 13 years now, it has been a school. And any normal review of targets would have had no trouble with satellite view of being able to see the playground and other such recognizable features. However, such niceties as the rules of warfare, of course, have been properly denounced and ridiculed by Secretary of War Hegseth. Now, I'll tell you what finally pushed it over the edge for me. Because I still wanted, even in the earliest hours of the attack on February 28th, to suggest that Iran was blowing up their own kids by some, maybe even a mistake on their part, when they hadn't even been firing any missiles yet. I don't know. I just have a real trouble with that. But the thing that pushed it over the edge for me was aboard Air Force One over the weekend. President Trump was asked whether the U.S. had bombed the elementary school in Minot, which killed 175, almost all girls between 7 and 12 years of age, in just 32 seconds. One can get a rather quick idea of the quality of thinking of the commander-in-chief and his so-called Secretary of War with this conversation. This is the thing that made me not want to believe it, but made me believe it. Trump. No, in my opinion, based on what we've seen, that was done by Iran. Reporter, is that true, Mr. Hegseth? Is it Iran who did that? Now, I don't know if you've seen this video or not, but they're standing at a door there in Air Force One. Hegseth is standing behind the president. And the thing that caught my attention right off the bat is that when the president denied American responsibility, the reporter looked over the president's shoulder to Hegseth behind him to get Hegseth's opinion, when Hegseth's boss, the president, just said, no, Iran did it. I mean, that pulled me up short. Like, obviously, the interviewer didn't believe the president, wanted Hegseth's opinion. So, after the president said, no, it was Iran, the reporter looks over the shot to his left, and you can see Hegseth standing there, looking not confused, just looking like, can we just shut the door, President Trump, and get these reporters out of here? But they said, is that true, Mr. Hegseth? It was Iran who did that? Hegseth's answer, well, we're certainly investigating. Then the reporter, still investigating? Hegseth had repeated his pat non-answer, but he added a new twist. Hegseth said, all I can say is that we're investigating, and that we, of course, never target civilian targets. But the only side that targets civilians is Iran. Well, Secretary Hegseth, I would like to introduce to you the concept of Gaza and the 70,000 plus women and children who have been targeted. Yes, it was the IDF who targeted them, but what did they use to kill these women and children? That's right, American armament. All right, that's my little aside. Now, apparently his suggestion is that Iran targeted the schoolgirls. President Trump stepped right back into the conversation. He said this, we think it was done by Iran. Of course, they are very inaccurate, with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. And then Trump's last word, it was done by Iran. Now, summing up, it seems that their analysis is that Iran targeted the school, they hit it, but they have no accuracy whatsoever. Now, remember, there were other military targets in the area because it's right down there near the Gulf of Hormuz. And there's a military installation there. So early on the morning of the 28th, American and Israeli forces were attacking this area. And I kept wanting to believe maybe it was an accidental hit by America to hit this schoolgirl, this school of girls. But then the president said, well, you know how inaccurate the Iranian missiles are. I don't know, Mr. President. I don't know if you've seen the videos I've seen of Tel Aviv and Bahrain and Yemen and Kuwait and the various U.S. military installations throughout the Arabian Peninsula, all the way up into Iraq. They don't look like they're firing blindly. Now, I know that I have offended a few of my listeners by the position I've taken here. This should never have happened. And what was going on the week before this attack started? What was real heavy in the news for a long time, but the last week before the attack, the last week of February. Prince Andrew, John Mountbatten, Bill Gates, President Clinton, Hillary Clinton were all very prominent in the news, moving in a certain direction of what? It was announced that week that the president was mentioned in the Epstein files 5,000 times. The pictures that are emerging now, the U.S. Justice Department, in all their promises a year ago, well, people are going to go to jail over this. And of course, as you know, no one yet has been indicted. No one has been sent to jail. Files have disappeared, and the files that they have been redacted to a point where you can't see or read anything. But you know what? The Epstein files are in the hands of foreign governments. And they didn't redact them. And some of the videos that are showing up on the internet are so nauseating. I'm not going to mention the names of the people who are in those videos. You can go see it yourself because it's simply too disgusting. And when it looked like it was headed for this big pestilence to finally bust open, America and Israel attack Iran. And have you heard the word Epstein in the last 10 days? What timing, what beautiful timing. All right, we're 10 days into the war. I would think that the international mood or perception is kind of between disillusionment about the character of what's going on and total panic of what these Doomsday airplanes, the E6B, indicate flying over the Middle East, because they are the last communication before the red button is pushed. Now, there was this not so funny element in a video which is being shown everywhere in the world right now. And you have to go to foreign sources to see it. But it's also on Russian TV. And it's one where President Trump is sitting with his eyes closed at his work desk in the White House, surrounded by people who seem to be praying with him, and some kind of a priest obviously calling on God for help. Now, I mean, obviously, this is some sort of a metaphor for the situation. I mean, otherwise, the situation in Iran itself, the Iranian assembly of experts who were tasked with selecting the replacement for Ayatollah Khamenei, announced yesterday or the day before that they had chosen the son of the Ayatollah, Mojtaba Khamenei, who would have been chosen by a majority after precise and extensive deliberation anyway. So the leader of the Supreme National Security Council, Ali Larijani, thanked the assembly of experts and basically said that the enemy who thought that they could get a deadlock following the death of Ali Khamenei were wrong. So in any case, so for now anyway, the continuity of the religious leadership in Iran is secured. Well, Trump didn't like this one bit. He told Fox News' Brian Kilmeade he's not a bit happy about it because he had said hours before that any individual picked by this council in Iran had to meet Donald Trump's approval. Can you obviously the Iranian leadership didn't pay any attention to that. In any case, the war is not going the way President Trump and Netanyahu have hoped. There were some briefings which were reported in The Intercept by Nick Turse, quoting sources that the administration simply does not have a clue. They don't have an actual, real, rational end game or plan for the aftermath of this. Why? Because this should have been over by now. The shock and awe of the initial attack, paralleling what happened in 2003, I think it was March, in Baghdad, was expected to take out the supreme ruler, that the Iranians would come out on the street thanking America for what they had done and celebrating the end of their hostage situation to Shia extremism. But the exact opposite happened. There were millions in the streets every night for several days after in a united effort to support the Iranian government. And then comes the Iranian missiles that, as President Trump said, were terribly inaccurate. And now Netanyahu's in hiding. Several high Israeli officials, Ben Gvir, dead. Supreme commanders dead. It's not really going the way they planned. And now with the lack, Ted Postel was on the Daniel Davis podcast the other day. It was very good, where he reported that even more important than the lack or the shortage of interceptor missiles, because they're running out of it, is the fact that the Iranians were able to knock out 4 coordinates of the THAAD system in the region, the high altitude anti-defense. And these are the eyes of the entire air defense system for the Middle East. They can see 5,000 kilometers. They were hit, they were basically boiled in fire or whatever. In any case, they're not functioning anymore. And the Pentagon obviously is not confirming this, but there's several reports that 4 such radar systems, which are the irreplaceable nerve centers for the radar surveying the entire region, has been knocked out. And that's obviously the result of the fact that Iran was for many years, and this is something that escapes me in the sense of national intelligence, military intelligence, CIA intelligence, have known for years that Iran knew that this attack was coming. This was no surprise. They knew eventually it was going to come. So what have they been doing? Not just building missiles and storing them, not just building drones and storing them, and apparently the missiles that they were firing last night, raining all kinds of hell over Tel Aviv and Haifa and other places inside of Israel, were missiles that were made between 2012 and 2014. They haven't even got to their high-tech missiles yet. And this is reported by many Eastern news sources. But not only has Iran been building these missiles, and listen, I'm not cheerleading for Iran. I'm cheerleading for the truth. And it's a very hard pill to swallow right now, especially on the American side. Now I'm back to just the streamers. But not only have they been building missiles, thousands of them for years, they have been studying the architecture, excuse me, and the planning of the United States in the Gulf. How long has the United States been in the Gulf? Well, more and more bases ever since the overthrow of the democratically elected president back in 1953. And so what has the Israeli or the Iranian intelligence been doing? They have mapped out every single radar station, each CENTCOM terminal, each communication radome, each THAAD system. And then they hit these with absolute precision. What was our intelligence doing at the time? I mean, is this arrogance or intelligence stupidity? That this could have gone on this long, thinking the Iranians, living in a condition of terrible religious autocracy and police state type of behavior, weren't paying any attention to this. No, they have been paying attention. And they've been mapping out, as I said, this architecture for decades. So these reports now say that the United States is in a position which they had not experienced for decades. Namely, that their most modern missile defense architecture has been blinded to a very large extent. And they are now in a situation confronted with an enemy who knows exactly where each element of that architecture was to be found. And now these systems are very expensive, as you well know. They cost anywhere from 1 to 1.8 billion per battery. And they need several years to be produced, so this cannot be replaced on short notice. What does this tell you? So basically, all the different commentators, both in Europe, but I think also the former American military, various other sources, there's this clear mood shift from the early days where basically all sort of agree that so far the U.S. has not accomplished its goal. No plan is visible. And the consequences for President Trump could be devastating. And there are already signs, even out of the Trump camp, that people are starting to distance themselves from our president. For example, Rubio said already a couple of days ago that the murder of Khomeini was not the goal of the United States. But naturally, nobody believes that anymore. So there's a definite shift in the situation. Our Foreign Secretary, our Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, said that 2 days ago, in contrary to something that President Trump had said. Well, the murder of Khomeini was not really the goal of the United States. Now, put that in the context of, the two most powerful men, or the two most powerful positions, could be a woman, outside of the immediate commander-in-chief, is the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of State. And for the Secretary of State to say something contrary to what President Trump had said, I think the rats might be getting ready to leave the ship. Now, that does not mean at all that the world's getting less dangerous. There's this long essay by James Galbraith, which basically goes at length through how Iran cannot be destroyed by conventional means, and also that the effort to overthrow the government apparently has failed. Is that why the Doomsday planes, the E6B, are flying in that area now? But naturally, he says that what always was in the background of all major crises over the last decades is always that there is a nuclear option. And, who was it on the Israeli Defense Council who said all options are on the table? All options are on the table. I forget. And that obviously is the danger, is that if there is a military defeat by Israel, then there is the danger that nuclear weapons can be used, because Netanyahu has already said that. So, what Galbraith was saying, he said, so far as I'm aware, the United States military still has leadership that is not eager to use nuclear weapons. Absent a direct attack, a nuclear attack on the United States, which of course would not come from Iran, because Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, nor do they have any way of getting it here. Even though the president, just before the attack, said Iran can reach the United States with the same crap you heard in 2003. So a seasoned observer and writer who I respect tells me that even in the present day Israel, these kind of people still exist who do not want a nuclear attack by Israel against Iran. I hope that's right. Now, I've just got a few minutes left in the program. Again, I want to mention I've cut off 50% of my initial fees to take care of people. Saw a couple of people yesterday, got 2 brand new people to take care of today. Older people with just ongoing, year after year, back pain, neck pain, sciatica, things that are really rather easy to fix. Some of them are difficult, but the majority of them are really easy to fix in a 2 or 3 visit program. So half off is a saving of quite a bit of money. You'd have to call the office, 801-523-1890, 801-523-1890, to schedule a consultation with me. If it turns out that we don't think we can help one another, we'll still be friends. There's no charge to sit down and talk with me. All right, so in the minutes just a couple of minutes left here, the danger with all this Armageddon and craziness in the air is that the Damocles sword hanging over the whole situation, and for whatever it's worth, Emmanuel Todd, the French historian, who had been one of the handful of very few people who predicted the Soviet Union would disintegrate, had used for that analysis not the usual statistics, but the high ratio of infant mortality for his prognosis. He didn't have a much more profound criteria, the collapse of the physical economy at large. But in any case, this fellow is saying now that the American empire is collapsing like the Soviet Union did. And he says there are clear parallels between the collapse of America and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he says the West has already lost the war in the Ukraine. The consequence of that defeat is disintegrating the West, as you see in the EU. And you can only compare it, he said, with the end of communism in the Soviet Union, even if it's difficult to get a clear picture of of that exact process. But the most spectacular symptom of the collapse of the West seems to be the complete lack of sense of reality. And I think that is without any question true. He says that the defeat in Ukraine is revealing the weakness of the system in the United States, which has a much deeper meaning than even the defeat in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And the U.S. is losing. They left behind chaos and retreat. And that's kind of what's happening internally inside of our country on our 250th anniversary. So, China, Russia, very heavily involved in the diplomatic activities, trying to calm the situation down. Lavrov is getting very much involved. Wang Yi is getting very much involved, trying to back this thing down from going entirely too far. All right, I think that'll probably do it for today. Tomorrow's a health show. I'll be on at 7 a.m. tomorrow. But this has been fun, I think, for the most part. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I just think, harmless as a dove, but wise as a snake. I think you need to prepare yourselves for what could end up being $200 a barrel oil and all of the sequelae that will follow after that, not just at the gas pump, but at the checkout counter in the supermarket. So keep your wits about you, pray mightily, and I will see you tomorrow. That is the end at K-Talk, and for those of you on the stream, once again, I greatly appreciate your audience and being a part of this. If you like and subscribe. As far as the health show is concerned, we're only a couple away from 900 subscribers now. So I'd like to see that with the political end as well. So I will see you all tomorrow.